Aaliyah Brooks sat in the airport cafe like she belonged there, like she was just another woman killing time before a flight. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Beyond the wide glass wall, suitcases rolled, families shuffled, and business travelers marched with eyes on their phones, minds already in another city. Aaliyah kept her eyes up anyway. Across the lobby, the check-in counters were waking up. Screens flickered, agents straightened name tags, and in the middle of all that normal motion, she saw something that did not belong in her life, not in the life she had been living for 7 years. Damien Brooks was there. He wore a dark suit that fit too perfectly for a Saturday. Hair freshly edged, watch catching the light each time he lifted his wrist. He looked awake in a way he never looked at home on a weekend, like he had slept well and wanted the day to begin. And beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost brushed, walked a young woman in a cream coat, slim and polished, her long curls spilling over the collar like she'd stepped out of an ad. They were not walking like coworkers. They were walking like people who had made plans in private, people who shared a secret and were pleased with themselves for keeping it. Aaliyah did not gasp. She did not stand. Her body went very still, the way it did when something sharp slid under the skin. A cold calm spread through her, clean and quick, pushing everything else back. She watched them stop at the kiosk. She watched the young woman tilt her head toward Damien, her mouth forming words Aaliyah couldn't hear. Damien smiled. An easy, unguarded smile Aaliyah had not been given in months. Aaliyah looked down at her own hands and noticed they were steady. That surprised her most. For a long time, she had imagined what this moment might feel like. She had imagined heat, humiliation, the urge to shout his name across a room. But what she felt now was quieter and worse, the steady click of something locking into place, like a door. A chime rang above the terminal. Then a woman's voice came through the speakers, calm and professional. "Attention passengers, Damien Brooks and Imani Tate, please report to the gate desk immediately. Damien Brooks and Imani Tate." Aaliyah's eyes lifted again. Damien froze. Not for long, just a fraction of a second, but she saw it. The little hitch in his movement, the way his smile dropped as if someone had reached inside him and turned off a switch. The young woman's face tightened. Her fingers clamped around the handle of her carry-on. Imani Tate. So that was her name. The announcement repeated. Around Aaliyah, other travelers barely reacted. People heard names all day in airports. Names meant lost phones, gate changes, standby seats. In this place, a name over the speaker was nothing, but Aaliyah heard it as a verdict. She let herself take one slow sip of coffee. It tasted burned, bitter, familiar. In her purse, tucked behind her wallet, was a white envelope. Plain, unmarked. Inside were 3 pages she had printed at 2 in the morning, standing in her kitchen with the lights off, the printer humming like it was telling on her. A travel itinerary, a hotel confirmation in downtown Chicago, and an email from Damien's corporate booking portal that said, in polite company language, that something about this trip was wrong. Unusual booking pattern, additional traveler, pending verification. Aaliyah had not planned to come to the airport that morning. Not at first. The idea had arrived quietly while she was doing dishes, while Damien was in the other room laughing at something on his phone. It arrived in pieces over weeks, then months, until one night it settled into her bones. If you want the truth, go where he can't rewrite it. Damien had been traveling for work more and more, and every time he came back, he carried a different kind of energy, like he'd been warmed by a fire Aaliyah had never seen. He showered the moment he walked in the door. He turned his phone face down on the counter. He answered her questions with one-word replies, then changed the subject like her curiosity was an inconvenience. Aaliyah wasn't a dramatic woman. She had never thrown plates, never screamed in public. She worked the front desk at a dental clinic where you learned to stay steady, where you smiled even when your stomach was tight because the waiting room could feel it. She had built her life on being reasonable, so when the doubt first appeared, she tried to reason it away. Men got stressed, jobs got demanding, Marriage went through seasons. She told herself all the things women tell themselves when they want to keep a home intact. But doubt has a way of changing shape. It starts as a soft bruise you keep pressing, then becomes a hard knot you can't ignore. Over time, it grew teeth. And then, 2 nights ago, she saw the email. Damien had left his laptop open on the dining table, a rare mistake, like a man who didn't believe he could be caught. Aaliyah wasn't digging through hidden folders or guessing passwords. The screen was simply there, glowing. An inbox tab open, a notification from his company's travel system sitting at the top like it wanted to be seen. She read it once, then twice. She printed it. She printed the itinerary. She printed the hotel confirmation that didn't match the story Damien had told her about meeting a client near the warehouse. After that, she slept in the shallow way people sleep when their mind refuses to lay down its weapons. Now she was here. She had driven in silence, radio off, rehearsing nothing. No speeches, no threats, just a promise to herself. Today, the truth would have nowhere to hide, not even him. Across the lobby, Damien and Imani started moving toward the gate desk, walking fast, heads turned slightly inward as if they could make the world smaller by focusing only on each other. Damien's hand hovered near Imani's elbow, not quite touching, but close enough to claim her. The strange thing was how ordinary it all looked. The betrayal did not come with thunder. It came with rolling luggage and fluorescent lighting and a coffee cup cooling in her hand. Aaliyah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Not to call Damien, not to text him, not to demand an explanation that would only invite a new lie. She scrolled once, found the number she had saved the night before, and pressed call. Corporate Travel Compliance Hotline. She held the phone to her ear, and as it rang, she kept her eyes on Damien's back. The operator answered with a practiced voice, the kind you could lean on. Compliance desk, how may I help you? Aaliyah spoke calmly. I need to report a potential misuse of corporate travel booking. The trip is under Damien Brooks. There is an additional traveler attached who does not appear to be an employee or approved guest. There was a pause, a quick click of keys. Can you provide the booking reference? Aaliyah read it from the printed page in her purse, each letter and number clean, exact. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She sounded, to anyone listening, like a woman doing the responsible thing, because that was the truth. Thank you, the operator said. We will flag the reservation for verification. If there is an issue, the traveler may be asked to step aside for review at the gate. Aaliyah ended the call and slid her phone back into her purse. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply sat there and watched, because watching was what she had been doing for months, and she was done pretending her eyes were lying to her. The speaker chimed again, softer now, and Aaliyah felt the next part of her life waiting just beyond the glass. If you're listening right now, don't click away. Not yet. Because what happens after Damien turns around and realizes he has been named, out loud, in public, changes everything. And it doesn't happen the way people expect. If you can, tap the like button so this story can reach someone who needs it. And tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching and what city you're in. I want to know who's sitting with Aaliyah in this moment. Aaliyah Brooks didn't move when the announcement faded. She stayed in the cafe chair, letting the terminal swallow the sound the way it swallowed everything. Names, apologies, little lies. Damien and the woman in the cream coat were still across the lobby, still angled toward the gate desk, still acting like the world belonged to them. Aaliyah watched until her eyes started to sting, not from tears, but from the effort of staying steady. Then she looked down at the white envelope in her purse. It was plain and thin, the kind of thing you could mail a warranty card in, but it held paper that could split a life clean in half. She pressed her fingers over it once, like she was checking a pulse, and leaned back. The cafe smelled like espresso and sanitizer. A child cried somewhere behind her. A man laughed too loudly into a headset. Aaliyah let the noise wash over her, and she went back. Not all the way back to the beginning, just far enough to see how a marriage can change without making a sound. She was 30 years old, born and raised in Prince George's County, Maryland, where people still held doors and still called older women Miss out of habit. Aaliyah worked the front desk at Bright Smile Dental, a small clinic wedged between a nail salon and a pharmacy. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. She knew how to calm a nervous patient with a soft voice. She knew how to talk to insurance companies without losing her temper. She kept the schedule tight, the waiting room quiet, and the staff moving. Damien used to say he loved that about her. "You make chaos look organized," he'd tell her. And he'd kiss her forehead like he was proud to be chosen by someone who could keep a life upright. Damien Brooks was 38, tall, polished, the kind of man who looked natural in a suit. He worked in logistics, freight lanes, contracts, port schedules, the kind of job that sounded dull until you realized how much money depended on timing. When he spoke about work, he liked to sound essential, like he was the reason the whole machine kept turning. When they met, he didn't have the title yet. He was hungry, always planning. He'd take her down by the water and point at cranes and containers like they were his personal trophies. Aaliyah had liked the certainty in his voice. She had liked the way he made the future sound like a thing you could schedule. They married after 2 years. Nothing flashy, close family, good food, music that made the aunties stand up and sway. Damien cried when she walked toward him, not sobbing, just tears at the corners of his eyes, like he couldn't believe he was allowed to have something that good. Aaliyah believed it too. For a while, it was good. Their house sat on a quiet street lined with maples and clipped lawns. Not a mansion, but clean and warm. The kind of place where you could picture a kid's bike leaning against the porch. They talked about children the way people talk about weather, like it was coming, like they just had to be ready. Aaliyah kept lists in a notebook by the stove. Groceries, bills, savings. Damien teased her, but he also leaned on her steadiness. She'd budget, he'd dream. Together it balanced. Until it didn't. The first shift came so small she almost missed it. Damien started taking calls after dinner, stepping into the living room like he didn't want to disturb her. That sounded considerate. But when Aaliyah walked in, he'd lower his voice and turn his shoulder, hiding the sound itself. He would end the call quickly, then look up with a bright, innocent face that didn't match his tone a second earlier. "Work?" he'd say, before she asked. "Just work." At first, Aaliyah believed him. Logistics ran late. Ports didn't care what time it was. People had problems, and Damien was paid to solve them. Then the calls became regular, and the way he spoke on them changed. It wasn't the clipped voice he used with staff. It wasn't the polite voice he used with clients. It was softer, almost warm, like he was speaking to someone he didn't want to disappoint. Aaliyah would be in the kitchen rinsing plates, listening to his voice drift down the hall, catching pieces. "Not tonight." "You know I can't." "I'll call you tomorrow." It was always tomorrow. Then there were the trips. Damien had traveled before, once a month sometimes. He'd come back tired, complaining about airport food and cheap pillows. He'd drop his suitcase by the stairs and pull Aaliyah into a long hug like he'd missed home in a real way. But 3 months ago, the pattern changed. The trips doubled, then doubled again. Chicago, Denver, places that sounded like business, but arrived too close together to feel normal. Damien stopped complaining about it. Instead, he started acting energized, like the road was feeding him. He bought new shirts, not one, several, crisp fabrics he'd never chosen before. He switched cologne without mentioning it. Sharp, woody, expensive. He joined a gym and suddenly cared about his shoulders and his waistline in a way that felt late, urgent, like he was trying to keep up with somebody else's eyes. Aaliyah noticed everything. She just didn't say much, because after 7 years of marriage, you learn the difference between curiosity and accusation. You learn which questions are harmless and which ones are matches. And Aaliyah wasn't trying to burn her own house down on a hunch, so she watched, she listened, and she waited for a detail that didn't fit. It came on an ordinary weeknight. Damien walked in, kissed her cheek, and went straight to the bathroom. Not to wash his hands, to shower, immediately, like he needed to rinse something off him before it touched the furniture. Aaliyah stood in the hallway and stared at the closed door, feeling that first true chill bloom in her stomach. Later, while he ate, he barely looked at her. His phone stayed in his palm like a second heartbeat. When she told him about a patient who'd fainted in the waiting room, he nodded without hearing her, eyes sliding back to the screen. When she asked about his day, he offered 2 words. Busy? Fine. Then he smiled at his phone. That smile was small, private, and not for her. Aaliyah went to bed with her eyes open, watching the ceiling fan cut slow circles through the dark, thinking about all the times she'd defended him in her own mind, thinking about how careful he'd become with his stories. The next morning, he was brighter than usual. He dressed with extra attention and said, I might have to head to Chicago this weekend. Client situation. Weekend? Aaliyah asked. On a Saturday? Damien's eyes flicked away. Yeah, it's urgent. You know how it is. What it was, Aaliyah thought, was convenient. That evening, while she folded laundry, he suggested she visit her sister in Richmond for the weekend. Damien didn't usually encourage that. He liked Aaliyah close. He liked knowing where his life was when he wasn't in it. But now he said it lightly, like an idea that had just occurred to him. You should go, he told her. Get out. Relax. I'll be traveling anyway. Aaliyah smiled, because that's what a reasonable wife does when her husband suggests something nice. She nodded, because she didn't want him to see the suspicion sharpening behind her teeth, but inside she heard the real message. Be gone. Clear the space. She started paying attention to the tools of his life, his suitcase, his receipts, his calendar. Damien wasn't sloppy, but he was confident. And confidence makes people careless in small ways. He'd leave his laptop open when he ran to the bathroom. He'd toss a printed boarding pass on the counter, like it didn't matter. He'd swipe out of an email, a beat too late, thinking she was still upstairs. Aaliyah didn't go digging. She didn't want to be the kind of woman who hunted her husband like prey. She just noticed what he left behind. And 2 nights ago, he left behind enough. Damien's laptop was open on the dining table while he showered. Aaliyah was walking past with a glass of water when a notification flashed on the screen. She glanced without meaning to, then stopped. Not because she wanted to snoop, but because the subject line felt like a hand grabbing her wrist. Booking flagged for verification. She read the preview. Additional traveler attached, pending approval. Aaliyah stood there in the dim kitchen light, staring at the words until they stopped looking like English and started looking like a road sign you couldn't ignore. Additional traveler. That wasn't a client. That wasn't a coworker. That was a secret with a seat assignment. She printed the email, then the itinerary, then the hotel confirmation. Downtown Chicago, king bed, late checkout. She folded the pages neatly and slid them into an envelope, the way her grandmother used to fold church programs. Careful, respectful, like paper held power when you treated it right. That night, Damien slept like a man who believed he was safe. His breathing deepened. His hand rested on Aaliyah's hip like a claim. Aaliyah lay still, staring into the dark, feeling something harden inside her. Not rage, a decision. By Friday morning, she had already chosen how she would move. Not loudly, not messy, not in a way that gave him room to call her paranoid. She would let the truth speak where it couldn't be softened. So she came to the airport. And now, as Damien and Imani stood at the gate desk with their polished faces starting to crack, Aaliyah understood something with a clarity that almost hurt. People think betrayal happens in a moment, but it doesn't. It happens in tiny choices, in quiet calls, in phones turned face down, in cologne swapped without a word, in a husband suggesting his wife take a trip right when he needs her gone. And the only reason it feels sudden is because the faithful person stays hopeful longer than they should. Aaliyah lifted her cup again and took a slow sip, eyes steady on the man she married. In a few minutes, he would try to explain. In a few minutes, he would look around for control. And in a few minutes, he would realize that for the first time in a long time, Aaliyah wasn't asking him to tell the truth. She was done asking. She was letting the world require it. And she would not blink, no matter how he tried to make her. Aaliyah stayed seated when Damien and Imani reached the gate desk. She didn't lean forward. She didn't crane her neck like a woman trying to catch gossip. She kept her posture the way she kept her face at work. Calm, neutral, almost polite. If she moved too much, the moment might turn into theater. And she wasn't here for theater. She was here for truth. The agent behind the desk spoke with the practiced warmth of someone trained to keep problems from becoming scenes. Aaliyah couldn't hear the words, but she could read the shapes of them. A question. A request. A pause that said, "Please wait." Damien's shoulders tightened as if the air had become heavier. He slid his boarding pass across the counter. Imani leaned in close, her mouth moving quickly, her hand touching his forearm in a gesture that looked affectionate from far away. Up close, Aaliyah knew it would look like control. Damien glanced around the concourse, and for a second, Aaliyah wondered if he'd see her. She wore a simple navy coat and kept her hair pinned back. No bright colors, no drama. She looked like a woman traveling for a conference, a woman who could be anyone. Damien's eyes swept past her table and moved on. It wasn't that he didn't love her. It was worse than that. In his mind, she wasn't even possible here. She was where she always was, at home, at the clinic, in the background of his life like furniture. The speaker chimed again, softer this time, then fell silent. The concourse kept breathing. A child chased a balloon. Two older men argued gently over a newspaper headline. Someone wheeled a wheelchair toward the restroom. The world didn't stop for the end of a marriage. Aaliyah watched the agent pick up a phone and turn slightly, shielding the mouthpiece. Damien's face went blank, that smooth mask he wore in meetings when he was waiting to see which direction the wind would blow. Imani's chin lifted. She looked impatient, like a woman accustomed to being accommodated. Aaliyah took her own phone from her purse, unlocked it, and opened her notes app. Not because she wanted to collect pain like souvenirs, but because memory could be softened by time. Paper and timestamps couldn't. She typed one line. Gate desk called, 6:42 a.m. Damien with Imani, cream coat, silver suitcase. She added another. Agent on phone. Damien scanning crowd. Her fingers didn't shake. Her body was doing what it always did in crisis. It became efficient. She remembered the first time she'd seen Damien act efficient in crisis. It was years ago, back when they were dating, and her car had died on the shoulder of the Beltway. She'd called him, trying to stay casual, trying not to sound scared, and he'd arrived with a tow truck and a calm voice, like he was built for rescue. She had leaned into his competence and felt safe. Now she watched the same competence in his posture, and it made her feel nothing. He was still built for rescue. He just wasn't rescuing her. The agent hung up the phone. A man in a blazer appeared from the side corridor, the kind of supervisor who wore a badge on his belt and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He approached the desk, spoke to the agent, then looked at Damien and Imani with the quiet authority of someone about to change their plans. Damien's mouth opened. He said something, a short burst, like, "There must be a mistake." The supervisor held up one hand, palm down, in a calming gesture. Imani's face tightened. She said something longer, more animated. The supervisor listened without reacting, then pointed toward a roped-off area near the wall, away from the flow of passengers. Aaliyah felt a pulse of cold satisfaction that surprised her. Not gloating, not joy, just the clean recognition that the world was no longer taking Damien's word as law. He was being directed. He was being managed. For a man who lived on control, that was the first crack. Damien picked up his carry-on and guided Imani toward the side area. They walked with practiced dignity, as if they were simply following an upgrade procedure, as if everyone didn't know something was wrong. Aaliyah noticed that Damien's free hand hovered near Imani's back, but didn't touch. He didn't want to look like he belonged to her. Not here, not in public, not when the rules were watching. Aaliyah's chest tightened anyway, not because she missed him, because she saw him editing himself for another woman. She had spent months watching him edit himself for her. They reached the roped area and stood there while the supervisor spoke into a radio. Damien held his phone in his hand and typed. Imani stared at the floor like she was counting the tiles. Aaliyah stared at them until the edges of her vision blurred. Then she forced herself to look away and focus on something ordinary. The menu board above the counter, the price of a muffin, the bitter smell of coffee. She reminded herself that this was still an airport, still a public place, still full of cameras. She needed to stay invisible. At the clinic, Aaliyah had learned that some people only confessed when you gave them room to speak. You didn't corner them. You didn't raise your voice. You let silence do the work. The anxious ones filled it with truth. The guilty ones filled it with lies. Either way, you got what you needed. So she stayed silent. Minutes passed. 10, 15. Boarding began for the Chicago flight at the far end of the concourse. People lined up, cheerful, sleepy, annoyed. Aaliyah heard the announcer's voice float through the space. Group 1, Group 2, final boarding. The plane would leave with or without Damien. Aaliyah watched the line move and imagined the seat he'd chosen, the window view he'd planned, the hotel room waiting downtown with a king bed and a late checkout. She imagined him walking in with Imani, laughing, shedding his suit jacket, like he was shedding his marriage. The picture was so clear, it almost felt like memory. Then she watched the gate agent scan the final boarding pass and close the door. The flight left without them. Aaliyah had wondered, in the quiet hours before dawn, if she was crossing some invisible line by making that call. She'd been raised by women who believed you handled your business in your house. You didn't invite strangers to witness your pain. You didn't put your husband's name in the mouths of people who didn't love him. But rules were meant for honest people. Damien had already brought strangers into their marriage. Hotel clerks, bartenders, gate agents who watched him smile at a woman who wasn't his wife. He had brought in the corporate system that paid for his flights and assumed he was acting in good faith. He had brought in Imani's laughter and perfume and hands on his arm. Aaliyah wasn't the one making it public. She was the one refusing to keep it secret. The night she printed the documents, she opened her own laptop and searched for the travel policy Damien's company made employees sign. It wasn't hidden. It was posted like a promise. Corporate funds used for business purposes only. No unauthorized travelers. No personal expenses. Aaliyah read it slowly, line by line, as if she were reading a medical chart. She wasn't looking for punishment. She was looking for the truth Damien had buried inside paperwork. Then she found the part about reporting misuse. A hotline number. A process. A place where feelings didn't matter, only facts. It felt like it had been designed for her. She sat at the kitchen table with the policy glowing on the screen, hands wrapped around a mug, staring at the words until the house felt colder. Damien was upstairs asleep, breathing like a man with no fear. Aaliyah listened to that breathing and realized something that made her stomach drop. He wasn't scared because he didn't think she would ever move. He thought her decency was a leash. At 4 in the morning, she texted her Aunt Renee, the closest thing she had to an older sister in the neighborhood. Renee was 52, sharp as a pin, the kind of woman who could read a man's lie the way other people read weather. "You up?" Aaliyah wrote. Renee answered 2 minutes later. "Baby, what's wrong?" Aaliyah typed, "I think Damien is living a second life." Renee's reply came fast. "Then don't chase him. Document him. Men hate paper." Aaliyah stared at that sentence until it stopped being funny and started being true. Paper didn't care about charm. Paper didn't forgive. Paper didn't believe a smooth voice. Paper just sat there and waited to be read. So she printed and tucked the pages away like a blade she didn't want to show too soon. Now, watching Damien trapped behind a rope while the plane pulled away from the gate, she felt that blade in her purse. She didn't swing it wildly, she just held it, steady. And in that steady hold, she could feel the old Aaliyah fading, the one who begged for honesty. This Aaliyah listened for facts, for footsteps, for doors closing, and did not flinch. Not even once. Damien's head snapped up, as if he heard the click of that door in his bones. His hand went to his belt, then to his pocket, then to his phone again. He paced within the small space allowed to him, one step forward, one step back, like a caged animal trying to pretend it was simply waiting. Imani's patience snapped first. She threw her hands up and said something sharp. Even from a distance, Aaliyah could see the shape of it. "Why is this happening? What did you do?" Damien responded with a steady stream of words, his palms out, his shoulders squared, trying to calm her the way he would calm a client. Imani shook her head, lips pressed tight, eyes shiny with anger. Aaliyah thought, "You picked a woman who believes you. That's what you wanted. Someone who would look at you like you were still a hero. But heroes get exposed in bright lighting." The supervisor returned with another man, this one older, with a lanyard that said compliance on it. The two of them spoke to Damien and Imani. Damien listened, nodding again, as if agreement could fix a situation built on facts. The compliance man held a clipboard and pointed to a line on a page. Damien leaned in, Imani leaned in too, then jerked back as if she'd been slapped by a word. Aaliyah couldn't hear it, but she knew what it was. Unauthorized traveler. Misuse of corporate funds. A second name attached to his booking. Aaliyah's stomach turned, not with guilt, but with the strange nausea of watching your private life become public procedure. Damien's affair wasn't just a betrayal now. It was a case number, a form, an audit. It was being spoken about in calm, official language by men who did not care about Aaliyah's tears, only about the money Damien had tried to move through their system. Aaliyah's phone buzzed. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Damien's name appeared on the screen anyway, bright and insistent. She watched it ring, once, twice. She let it go to voicemail. Her phone buzzed again immediately. Another call. She silenced it with a slow press of her thumb, as if she were turning down background noise. Damien looked down at his own phone, saw that he wasn't getting through, and lifted his head. His eyes scanned again, sharper now. He was searching for an enemy. He was searching for a reason. He was searching for someone to blame. Aaliyah's heart beat once, hard. She pulled her coat tighter and lowered her gaze to the table. She became small. She became ordinary. Damien's eyes passed over her again and moved on. He didn't see her. He saw only the problem. That was how he'd been living for months. Seeing the thing in front of him as an obstacle, not a person. His marriage had become a piece of furniture he walked around on his way to something else. Aaliyah thought about the night he'd suggested she visit her sister. He'd said it like an innocent idea, like he was doing her a favor. But his eyes had been on the TV, not on her face. He hadn't wanted her happiness. He had wanted her absence. That realization had been a quiet kind of violence. Now, watching him stand behind a rope with his girlfriend, Aaliyah felt the violence finally meet its own consequences. Not punishment, not revenge, consequences. The compliance man spoke again, then gestured toward a side hallway marked Authorized Personnel. Damien stiffened. Imani's mouth fell open. She stepped back, clutching her purse to her chest. Damien tried to smile, tried to charm, tried to make it small. The compliance man didn't smile back. He pointed again. They were escorted, politely, firmly, toward the hallway. Aaliyah stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically. She slid her chair back with care, tossed her empty cup in the trash, and walked behind a family with two toddlers, letting their noise cover her movement. She followed at a safe distance, using the crowd as cover, staying close enough to see but far enough to be nothing. At the hallway entrance, Damien looked over his shoulder. For a second, his eyes narrowed, as if he sensed a presence he couldn't name. Aaliyah stopped walking and pretended to read a sign about baggage restrictions. Damien turned back and disappeared into the hallway with Imani and the two men. The door closed. Aaliyah exhaled slowly through her nose. Her lungs felt too full, like she'd been holding her breath for months, and only now realized it. She didn't know what they were saying behind that door. She didn't know if Damien was trying to spin a story, if Imani was crying, if someone was calling his company. But she did know something important. For the first time in a long time, Damien was having to answer questions he couldn't control. Aaliyah returned to her café table, sat down, and opened her notes again. She typed, "Escorted to back office. 7:18 a.m. Flight departed without them." Her phone buzzed again. This time a text. Aaliyah didn't open it. She didn't need the words. She could imagine them. "Baby, where are you? What's going on? Call me. It's a misunderstanding. Damien loved misunderstandings when the truth made him look ugly. Aaliyah turned her phone face down on the table, mimicking the habit he'd taught her to hate. It felt different in her hands. It felt like control reclaimed. She stared at the closed hallway door and waited. She had always been good at waiting, good at patience, good at sitting quietly with discomfort and telling herself it would pass. That skill had built her marriage and nearly destroyed her. This waiting was different. This waiting was for the end of something. A woman in a red scarf sat at the table beside Aaliyah and opened a crossword puzzle. She hummed softly to herself, calm and unaware. An older couple shared a bagel and argued about whether they'd packed their pills. Aaliyah watched them with a distant tenderness. Life kept moving around her like water around a stone. And somewhere behind a closed door, Damien's other life was being dissected by strangers. Aaliyah's mind slipped, uninvited, into another memory. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, Damien had come home late and too cheerful. He'd kissed her mouth, not her cheek, and the kiss had been quick, like a stamp. Then he'd gone straight to the shower. When he came out, his hair was damp and his phone was in his hand. He'd sat across from her at the kitchen table and started eating the dinner she'd reheated, scrolling while he chewed. Aaliyah had watched him and asked, gently, "Who are you talking to so much?" Damien hadn't even looked up. "Nobody." "Nobody calls you at night," she'd said, still gentle. "Nobody makes you smile at your screen." He'd looked up then, just enough to make her feel like she'd broken a rule. His eyes had been cold, the kind of cold men reserve for women they think are being inconvenient. "You're imagining things," he'd said. "You're bored." Aaliyah had swallowed the words she wanted to say. She had gone to bed with that sentence lodged in her throat like a bone. "You're bored," as if her love for him had become a hobby she wasn't handling correctly. Now, in the airport, she felt that bone dissolve. Because Damien was not bored, Damien was afraid. The hallway door opened. Aaliyah's spine straightened without her permission. She kept her face neutral, but her senses sharpened like a blade. Damien stepped out first, flanked by the supervisor and the compliance man. His suit jacket was still on, but it looked heavier now, like it had absorbed bad news. His mouth was set in a tight line. His eyes were brighter, strained, the way they got when he was close to anger, but trying to keep it under control. Imani followed behind them, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wet. She clutched her phone in her hand and kept wiping at her face as if she were angry at her own tears. Her posture had changed. The confidence was gone. She looked like a person who had just learned she was not as protected as she thought. The compliance man said something and handed Damien a piece of paper. Damien stared at it, then shook his head. He spoke quickly, his hands moving in the air in a pattern Aaliyah recognized. Negotiation. He was trying to bargain reality down into something he could manage. The supervisor listened for a moment, then pointed toward the exit of the terminal, the side doors that led to the curb. Not the security checkpoint, not the gate, the exit. Damien's jaw tightened. He turned his head toward Imani, said something sharp. Imani flinched. Aaliyah's stomach sank. Not because she cared about Imani's feelings, because she recognized that flinch. It was the flinch of someone who suddenly understood the power dynamic. Damien started walking toward the exit, shoulders stiff. Imani trailed behind him, trying to keep up. The compliance man stayed beside them like a shadow. Aaliyah stood again, moving with the same careful calm, and followed at a distance. At the curb, the morning air hit her face, cold and sharp. Cars idled. Drivers leaned out to shout names. A shuttle bus hissed to a stop. The world smelled like exhaust and winter. Damien stood near a pillar, phone pressed to his ear now, speaking fast. Aaliyah couldn't hear his words, but she could read the panic. His free hand gestured, palm open, as if he were trying to convince an invisible person not to end him. Imani stood a few feet away, arms crossed, staring at the ground. Aaliyah watched Damien pull his phone away from his ear and look at the screen. He tried again. Another call, probably to her. He looked up, scanning, and then his eyes landed on Aaliyah. Not because she'd moved, not because she'd made a sound, because the morning light hit her face at the wrong angle and made her visible, because the universe has a sense of timing when it comes to humiliation. Damien's expression shifted in stages. Confusion first, like his brain refused to accept the image, then recognition, then a rapid tightening around the mouth, as if he were trying to swallow shock without choking. Aaliyah didn't wave. She didn't smile. She didn't look away either. She held his gaze with the calm of a woman who has already done the math. Damien took one step toward her, then stopped, looking around as if he suddenly realized he was in public, surrounded by witnesses, people who might film him, people who might post it. He didn't want a scene. Not now, not when his job might already be slipping. Aaliyah stepped forward instead, closing the distance just enough to make him feel her presence, but not enough to give him the comfort of closeness. She stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the curb filled the space, engines, wheels, voices, an intercom announcing lane numbers. Aaliyah heard her own heartbeat and felt it settle into a steady rhythm. She had thought she might shake in front of him. She didn't. Damien's mouth opened. "Aaliyah!" She raised a hand, not harsh, just precise, the way you signal a patient to pause so you can speak. "Don't!" she said. The word was quiet, but it landed hard. Damien's eyes flicked toward Imani, then back to Aaliyah. "What are you doing here?" Aaliyah's voice stayed even. "Watching." Damien's face flushed. This is not what it looks like." Aaliyah let the corner of her mouth lift, not in humor, but in disbelief, so tired it was almost peaceful. "It looks like you missed your flight." Damien's jaw clenched. He tried to step closer again, lowering his voice. "You don't understand. This is a work trip. There's a situation with the booking. Some kind of compliance," Aaliyah said, tasting the word. "That's what they called it." Damien blinked. The word hit him like a slap because it told him she knew exactly what was happening. It told him she wasn't guessing. Imani took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "Who is this?" Damien didn't answer her right away. He was staring at Aaliyah, trying to figure out where the trapdoor was, how she had gotten here, how much she knew. Aaliyah could see the calculations in his face, the same calculations he did with freight schedules and contract clauses. He was trying to move pieces on a board that had already been flipped. Aaliyah glanced at Imani once, then back to Damien. "Tell her," she said softly. Damien's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Aaliyah, not here." "Not here," she repeated. "Because here you can't lie." Damien's eyes hardened. "You had me pulled aside. You did this." Aaliyah held his gaze. "You did this," she corrected. "I just stopped protecting you from your own choices." Imani's face went pale. "Wait, that's your wife?" Damien's silence was an answer. Imani's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Damien like she was seeing him for the first time. Then she turned her eyes on Aaliyah, and for a second there was something like shame there, quick, defensive, swallowed immediately by anger. "This is crazy," Imani snapped. "Damien, you said you were separated." Damien flinched. Just a small twitch, but Aaliyah saw it. He'd told Imani a story that made him clean. He always did. Aaliyah's voice stayed calm. 7 years married, she said, as if reading from a file. Not separated, not even close. Imani's eyes flashed. She turned on Damien. "You told me—" Damien lifted both hands. "Not now, Imani. Please." The compliance man, who had been standing by the pillar pretending not to listen, cleared his throat. "Sir, we do need to conclude the review. Your company has been notified. You'll receive instructions regarding reimbursement and next steps." Damien's face tightened again. "Notified? Already?" Aaliyah watched that word land. Notified. It meant phones ringing in offices. It meant HR files opening. It meant Damien's name being spoken in rooms he wasn't in. Imani looked between them, then stepped back like she wanted distance from the contamination. Her phone buzzed and she stared at it, then at Damien. "My ride is here," she said, voice thin. "I'm leaving." Damien reached for her arm. Imani, wait! She jerked away. No, don't touch me. You just ruined my weekend for… For what? For your wife showing up like this? For you lying? Damien looked at Aaliyah with a sharp, accusing glare, like this was her fault. Aaliyah felt something cold rise in her chest. Not anger, a final clarity. Damien had betrayed her, and now he was angry she'd seen it. Imani turned to Aaliyah once more, eyes narrowed. You think you won, she said. Aaliyah didn't react. This isn't a game, she replied. It's a life, and I'm taking mine back. Imani's face twitched, like she didn't know how to respond to a sentence that wasn't performing. Then she grabbed her suitcase and walked toward the rideshare lane without looking back. Damien watched her go, his mouth open, stunned. For a moment, he looked almost boyish, like a kid who had dropped a glass and couldn't believe it shattered. Then he turned on Aaliyah again, anger rushing in to cover the fear. What did you do? He hissed. Aaliyah's voice stayed low. I read your booking. Damien's eyes widened. You went through my… You left it open, Aaliyah said. You got careless. Damien's face twisted. You had no right. Aaliyah stared at him, the morning air cutting across her cheeks. You had no right, she said softly. But you did it anyway. The compliance man stepped away, speaking into his radio. Damien looked around again, like he could still find a way to reverse time. He couldn't. Aaliyah reached into her purse, pulled out the envelope, and held it out to Damien. He stared at it like it was something alive. What is that? He asked. Your trip, she said. Your extra traveler, your king bed, your late checkout. Damien's face drained of color. He didn't take the envelope. He didn't want to touch proof. Aaliyah slid it back into her purse. She wasn't giving him anything. She was showing him what she had, letting him feel the weight of it, then putting it away. Damien's voice dropped. We can talk. We can fix this. Aaliyah looked at him for a long moment. The man in front of her was still handsome, still tall, still wearing the watch she had saved for and wrapped with careful hands on his birthday. But his eyes were different now. They were the eyes of someone cornered, someone who wanted the old rules back. Aaliyah's voice was almost gentle. You had months to fix it, she said. You chose not to. Damien's nostrils flared. So what? You're going to blow up my career? Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. You already did. I just stopped sweeping. Damien's phone buzzed again. He looked down. His face tightened as he read whatever was on the screen. Aaliyah could almost hear the corporate tone. Please contact HR. Please report to the office. Please refrain from travel pending review. Damien's eyes lifted slowly. They're suspending my account, he said, voice hoarse. They're saying what it is, Aaliyah replied. Damien shook his head, trying to find footing. Aaliyah, listen. It's not serious. It was just, I was stupid. I was bored. Aaliyah cut him off with a quiet, flat sentence. Don't make me responsible for your hunger. Damien's mouth snapped shut. For a second, he looked like he might explode into rage. Then he looked past Aaliyah at the moving cars, the people with bags, the cold morning light, and he seemed to realize something else. He had nowhere to go. Imani was gone. The flight was gone. His company was calling. And the woman he had taken for granted was standing in front of him, steady as a wall. Damien's voice softened, turning toward pleading. Please, not like this. Not in public. Aaliyah nodded once, slow. You didn't protect me in private, she said. So don't ask me for protection now. She stepped back, creating space. She didn't want him close enough to touch her. Touch could confuse the body. Touch could make old love twitch. Damien reached out anyway, stopping himself at the last second. He lowered his hand like it burned. Come home, he said. Let's talk at home. Aaliyah's eyes stayed on his. I will come home, she said. But you won't come home the way you left. Damien frowned, not understanding. Aaliyah turned away. She walked toward her car with measured steps, refusing to run, refusing to look back. She felt Damien's stare on her spine like heat, but she kept moving. In the parking garage, the air smelled like oil and concrete. Her footsteps echoed. She reached her car and sat behind the wheel, hands resting on the steering wheel without turning the key. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. The ache under the calm. The grief that came with the death of an imagined future. Then she started the engine. As she drove out of the airport, her phone buzzed again. Text stacked on the screen. Aaliyah, please answer. Where are you? Why are you doing this? Call me now. Aaliyah didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the road. She drove past the river, past the early commuters, past the gray sky that looked like it had been scrubbed clean. She thought about the day ahead. Damien would come home. He would try to speak first. He would try to rewrite. He would try to make it about her jealousy, her coldness, her boredom, anything except his choices. Aaliyah would let him talk, and then she would show him the line he could not cross back over. At a red light, she glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face looked the same, but her eyes did not. They looked older, not with age, but with knowledge. The light turned green. She drove on. Behind her, a plane rose into the sky without Damien Brooks on it. And somewhere inside that rising engine noise, Aaliyah felt the last soft thread of denial snap. She wasn't going to chase him. She was going to end him, quietly, legally, and completely. And she was going to do it with the same steady hands that had held their life together for 7 years. Aaliyah didn't speed on the drive home. She didn't blast music to drown out the ache in her chest. She drove the way she always drove. Hands steady, eyes forward. Because steady was the one thing she still trusted. The neighborhood looked the same when she turned onto their street, and the normalness of it felt almost rude. She pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine running, listening to the quiet tick of the cooling hood. Her phone lit up again in her lap. Damien, Damien, Damien! Then an unfamiliar number, probably his boss, or HR, or somebody with authority in their voice. Aaliyah turned the phone face down and stepped out. Inside the house, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and laundry detergent. The place was quiet, like it was holding its breath with her. She moved through the rooms without touching anything, just letting her body remember the layout of a life she was about to rearrange. She went upstairs, changed out of her coat, and set the white envelope on the dresser. Then she made tea. Not because she wanted comfort, because she wanted her hands busy when the door opened. By late afternoon, Damien's car rolled in and stopped too hard at the curb. He got out fast, slamming the door. His tie was loose. His shoulders were tight, like he'd been carrying a weight, and decided to drop it on her doorstep. He let himself in with his key, like nothing had changed. Aaliyah! He called, voice sharp, already angry at the idea of resistance. She didn't answer from the kitchen. She waited until he found her. Damien stepped into the doorway and stopped. He was expecting tears, shaking, accusations. Instead, he saw her at the counter, stirring tea in slow circles, like time still obeyed her. "What the hell was that today?" he demanded. Aaliyah set the spoon down. She turned and looked at him fully. "You missed your flight," she said. "Don't play smart. You know what I mean." He took a step closer, then stopped, remembering the airport curb, remembering strangers. "They pulled me into a room," he said, pointing toward the hallway like the house itself was guilty. "They asked me questions like I'm a criminal. They contacted my company. Do you understand what that means?" Aaliyah nodded once. "It means your company knows you tried to take your girlfriend on their dime." Damien froze. The word girlfriend landed like a slap because it refused his favorite trick. Pretend it wasn't real. "Her name is Imani Tate," Aaliyah added, and watched his eyes flicker. "Cream coat. Silver suitcase." He stared at her. "How do you—" "Stop," she said quietly. "Don't make this about how I found out. Make it about what you did." Damien's chest rose and fell. He tried anger first. "You went through my laptop. You had no right." "You left it open," Aaliyah said. "You kept leaving pieces of yourself on the table. I stopped turning my head. So you called that hotline? Yes. His voice shook with rage. You tried to ruin me. Aaliyah didn't blink. I didn't ruin you, she said. I just stopped holding you together. His phone buzzed. He snatched it, read, and went pale. Aaliyah watched his face do the translation. HR, compliance, administrative leave. Do not contact clients. Report Monday. They're putting me on leave, he said, voice tight. Pending investigation. Aaliyah breathed out slowly, cause and effect settling into place. This is my career, Damien snapped. Then you should have treated it like one, Aaliyah replied. Instead, you treated it like a credit card. He forced his voice softer, bargaining. Okay, I messed up. I was stupid. But we can fix this. I can explain What would you explain? She asked. That you accidentally booked your mistress on a corporate account? Stop calling her that. Then stop earning the title, Aaliyah said. He stared at her like he'd never heard her speak with a spine. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did, she said. Every day you lied. Every time you suggested I leave town. Every time you looked at your phone like it mattered more than my voice. It wasn't supposed to go this far. That's how men talk when they thought they'd get away with it. His eyes flashed. So you're just going to throw away 7 years? You threw it away in pieces, Aaliyah said. I'm sweeping up. Silence stretched, clean and heavy. The house clock ticked in the hallway, like it was counting something down. Damien's voice turned bitter. Are you happy, seeing me like this? Aaliyah considered it. No, she said. I'm not happy. I'm clear. He swallowed. What do you want? Aaliyah walked to the living room, picked up a thin folder from the side table, and brought it back to the kitchen. Screenshots, policy, hotel confirmation. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. She slid it across the counter toward him. I want a divorce, she said. I'm filing tomorrow morning. Damien stared at the folder like it was a weapon. You can't just... I can, she said. And I will. He tried to dismiss it. This is because of one trip? Don't insult me, Aaliyah said, and the chill in her voice made him step back. This is because of months of lies. Because you turned our marriage into a waiting room where I sat alone while you lived somewhere else. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The words wouldn't come because he knew she was right. If you want to argue, Aaliyah continued, do it through lawyers. Damien's eyes went wet, not with remorse but fear. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. He exhaled, shaky. At least give me time. You have 7 days, she said. Sleep in the guest room. Stay out of my space. He stared, waiting for the world to correct itself. It didn't. Finally, he turned and walked away, footsteps heavy, moving toward the guest room like a sentence. That night, Aaliyah slept in her bed alone, not because she was lonely, but because she was finished sharing oxygen with someone who treated her like background. She woke before dawn, made coffee, and dressed for work like her life still had structure. Because it did. At 8:30, she walked into the office of Kendra Miles, attorney at law. Kendra was 46, with close-cropped hair and eyes that missed nothing. She shook Aaliyah's hand once and skipped sympathy. Tell me what happened, Kendra said. Aaliyah laid the folder on her desk and spoke in clean sentences. 7 years married, no children, house purchased before marriage, deed in Aaliyah's name, joint checking account, Damien's travel pattern, evidence, booking records, the airport confrontation. Kendra nodded. Good, she said. You didn't scream, you documented. I didn't want a mess. Divorce is always a mess, Kendra replied. The goal is to make it your mess, not his. Before she left Kendra's office, Aaliyah made one more request, her voice steady even as her stomach rolled. I don't want him emptying the account, she said. If he panics, he'll grab whatever he can. Kendra didn't blink. Then we move first. She typed quickly, printed 2 letters, and slid them across. One for the bank, one for Damien's employer. Notice of representation, instruction to route any questions through counsel, and a clean warning that funds were not to be shifted without disclosure. "Take this to your bank today," Kendra said, "and change every password you can think of. Email, utilities, the streaming accounts too. People laugh until they're locked out of their own life." Aaliyah left and drove straight to the branch where their joint checking account lived. The lobby was bright and quiet, all glass and soft music, designed to make money feel peaceful. At the desk, a banker with a warm smile asked how she could help. Aaliyah handed over Kendra's letter. "I need a hold," she said. "Temporary. Legal." The banker's smile faded into professionalism. She read the letter, nodded, then asked for identification. Aaliyah slid her driver's license across the desk and watched the banker's fingers move over the keyboard, moving fast, moving sure. "What about the debit cards?" the banker asked. "Deactivate mine and his," Aaliyah said. "I'll open a new account in my name only." The banker glanced up. "Are you safe at home?" Aaliyah paused just long enough to answer honestly. "I'm not in danger," she said. "I'm done." The banker didn't pry. She simply nodded, the way women do when they recognize a line has been crossed, and printed new paperwork. Aaliyah signed, opened the new account, and transferred only her paycheck deposit information to it. The joint account stayed, but it was frozen in place like a fly in amber. No quick withdrawals, no midnight transfers, no "I needed money for rent" stories. On the walk back to her car, the cold air cut her cheeks. Aaliyah felt something close to relief. Not because money mattered more than love, but because money was often where love got buried. Securing it felt like clearing rubble so she could breathe. In the parking lot, she called Aunt Renee. Renee answered on the second ring. "You okay, baby?" Aaliyah stared at the gray sky. "I filed," she said. A beat of silence, then Renee exhaled, low. "Proud of you." "I don't feel proud," Aaliyah admitted. "I feel quiet." "That's strength," Renee said. "Pride comes later." Aaliyah swallowed. "He's going to rage." "Let him," Renee replied. Anger is what men use when fear makes them feel small. Don't argue. Don't explain. Repeat the same sentence until he gets tired. "What sentence?" Renee's voice sharpened with certainty. "Talk to my lawyer." Aaliyah almost smiled. "Okay." "And Aaliyah," Renee added, "if he starts crying, don't confuse tears with truth." Aaliyah looked down at her hands. They were steady. "I won't," she said. By the time she reached the clinic, she felt armored. Not hard, but prepared. She moved through the day on routine. Because routine is what keeps you from drowning in your own thoughts. She moved through the day on routine because routine is what keeps you from drowning. At lunch, her phone buzzed once. "We need to talk. Please." At 3, her phone rang from an unknown number. She answered out of habit and heard a man ask for Damien Brooks, a process server. Aaliyah gave directions without emotion. When she hung up, her hands stayed calm, but her stomach tightened. Papers meant this was no longer a private argument. It was now public record in black ink. Aaliyah stared at the screen, then set the phone down without answering. When she got home that evening, Damien was in the living room, sitting too still. He stood when he saw her. "Did you file?" "Yes," Aaliyah said. His mouth tightened. "So that's it." "That's it." His voice shook with anger. "Do you know what this is doing to me at work? People are calling. They're treating me like someone who used company money to cheat," Aaliyah said, flat enough to stop him mid-sentence. He stared at her, breathing hard. "You're cold." "No," Aaliyah replied. "I'm awake." He swallowed. "I don't have anywhere to go yet." "You have 6 days." Damien glanced toward the stairs, toward the guest room, toward the life he had been demoted to. Aaliyah walked into the kitchen, heated leftovers, and ate at the table alone. The food tasted plain. She didn't mind. Plain was honest. Behind her, Damien spoke softly, almost to himself. "I didn't think you'd do this." Aaliyah waited until the microwave beeped, until the moment was clean. Then she answered, low and precise. I. That was your biggest mistake, she said. You thought my patience was permission. Damien didn't respond. She heard his slow footsteps, then the guest room door close. In the quiet that followed, everything lined up with harsh, simple logic. The late-night calls, the sudden trips, the suggestion that she leave town, the extra traveler on the booking, the compliance flag, the HR message, the divorce papers in her bag. It wasn't chaos. It was a chain. Aaliyah turned off the lights and went to bed, and for the first time in months, her body believed the truth enough to rest. The house sounded different once Damien started packing. Not louder, not quieter either, just rearranged, like the air itself had moved furniture without asking permission. Aaliyah heard it in small ways. The scrape of a drawer pulled too hard, the thud of shoes dropped into a box, the soft zip of the black suitcase she had watched him carry through 100 business trips. Only this time it wasn't headed for a hotel. It was headed away from her. She stayed out of his way on purpose. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she refused to be pulled back into the gravity of his panic. Men like Damien tried to drag you into a storm and then blame you for getting wet. Aaliyah wasn't getting wet. She moved through her days like she always had. Clinic, paperwork, patience, polite smiles, and came home to a house that was slowly becoming hers alone. She changed the passwords. She updated her direct deposit. She swapped the locks on the side gate. She didn't do it with anger. She did it with the same calm she used to confirm insurance coverage and schedule root canals. When she told Aunt Renee what she'd done, Renee laughed once, low and satisfied. "That's my girl," she said. "People think revenge is loud, but the real kind is quiet and irreversible." The weekend Damien moved out, it rained. Not hard, just steady. A gray, patient rain that made the street look polished and the trees look tired. Damien carried boxes to his car in silence, jaw clenched like he was chewing on humiliation. Aaliyah stood at the front door holding a small folder, just the essentials he needed to know. The lawyer's contact, the court date, the list of items he'd agreed to leave behind. No speeches, no tears, no bargaining. Damien paused by the trunk and looked back at her. His eyes were red, but his pride was still fighting. "You really don't care," he said, voice rough. Aaliyah didn't answer that right away. She watched the rain drip off the edge of the roof. She watched the neighbor's dog tug at a leash. She watched a world that didn't stop for betrayal. Then she said, "I cared for 7 years. You're confusing my peace with not caring." Damien swallowed. "Imani. She's gone. She won't even answer me." Aaliyah's expression didn't change. "That's between you and your choices." He shook his head like he couldn't accept it. "I made a mistake." "You made a pattern," Aaliyah corrected. "A mistake is one time." Damien stepped closer, just a few feet into the rain, as if water could wash him clean. "I'll do counseling," he said quickly. "I'll stop traveling. Aaliyah lifted a hand, gentle but final, the way you stop a patient from biting their own tongue. "No," she said. Just one word. Not sharp, not cruel, final. Damien stared at her like he was waiting for the old Aaliyah to appear. The one who softened, who tried to understand, who believed a promise meant change. But the old Aaliyah was gone. He rubbed his face with his palm, smearing rain and frustration together. "You're going to regret this," he muttered, the last defense of a man who has lost his leverage. Aaliyah held his gaze. "I already regretted staying quiet," she said. "That's what I won't do again." For a moment, Damien's mask cracked. Not the anger mask, the one underneath it, the one that admitted he was scared. "I don't know who I am without you," he said. Aaliyah felt the sentence try to hook her because it sounded vulnerable. It sounded like truth. But she had learned the difference between truth and hunger. "You should have thought about that before you built a second life," she said softly. "Go find yourself somewhere else." Damien's shoulders sagged. He nodded once, like he finally realized he couldn't talk his way back into the house. He climbed into his car and shut the door. The engine started. The headlights cut through the rain. And then he backed out slowly, careful not to splash the curb, like he still wanted to appear decent as he left. Aaliyah watched until his taillights disappeared at the end of the street. Then she went inside and closed the door. She leaned her forehead against the wood for a long moment. Not crying, just breathing. Letting the silence settle. Letting the house admit what it really was now. Not a stage for a marriage, but a space for one woman to live without shrinking. That night, she didn't cook anything elaborate. She made a simple bowl of soup and ate it by the window, watching the rain smear the streetlights. Her phone buzzed twice. Unknown numbers, likely Damien trying new angles. She didn't respond. She turned on an old movie Damien used to call slow. It was quiet, human, and full of long looks that said more than words. Aaliyah realized that was what she'd been missing. Not excitement, not drama, just honesty, the kind that sits in the room without needing to perform. The divorce moved faster than Damien expected. He didn't contest the house. He didn't fight the bank hold. His lawyer advised him to keep what pride he could. He showed up in court in a suit that looked slightly too big, like it belonged to the man he used to think he was. Aaliyah wore a simple black dress and a calm face. She brought the documents Kendra had prepared. She answered questions clearly. She didn't glance at Damien more than she had to. When the judge finalized it, the gavel sound was quiet, but it felt like a door locking. Outside the courthouse, Damien stood under the awning, hands in his pockets. He looked smaller, not physically, spiritually, like a man who had learned that charm doesn't work on consequences. Aaliyah walked past him toward her car. Damien called her name once. Aaliyah! She stopped, not because she owed him, but because she was finished running from difficult moments. She turned calm. Damien's voice was low. I'm sorry. Aaliyah watched his face, not searching for tears, searching for accountability, for a sentence that didn't try to make her responsible. He swallowed. I ruined something good, he said, and I didn't appreciate you until you were gone. That, at least, was honest. Aaliyah nodded once. I accept that you're sorry, she said, but I don't accept you back. Damien's eyes closed for a second. He nodded like he'd expected it, like he'd earned it. Aaliyah got into her car and drove away. On the first Saturday after the divorce, she woke up without an alarm. Sunlight spilled across the bedroom floor. The house was still. No suitcase by the stairs. No phone calls whispered from the living room. No perfume that wasn't hers. She made coffee, then pancakes. Something Damien always complained took too long. She ate slowly, savoring not the food, but the fact that nobody was rushing her. Nobody was draining the room with secret energy. Later that afternoon, she joined Aunt Renee for a book club meeting at a small café. Women sat around a table, laughing softly, talking about stories, about endings, about second chances. Someone asked Aaliyah, "How are you holding up?" Aaliyah didn't fake anything. She looked down at her coffee, then back up. I feel lighter, she said. Not because it didn't hurt, because I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Renee squeezed her hand once. That's the whole lesson right there. That night, Aaliyah stood in her living room, lights low, and looked around at the life she still had. Her job, her home, her quiet dignity, her ability to start again without begging permission. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt clean. And for the first time in a long time, she trusted herself more than she trusted love. Because love without honesty is just a pretty lie. And Aaliyah was done living inside one. If this story hit you somewhere personal, if you've ever felt that cold shift in a room, that moment when you realize you've been loyal to someone who isn't loyal to you, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Hit like if you want more real, slow-burn drama with consequences. And drop a comment. Do you think Aaliyah did the right thing, or did she go too far? Tell me what city you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Then tap the end screen and keep watching. There's another story waiting for you.